So
Yeah,
Harry, it's good to see you. And I
good to see you. Yeah. I always wanted to thank you. Remember, uh, I was in big trouble the first time I spoke with you, and then I spoke with you a few times as well over the phone. Uh,
yeah,
when I spoke with you about going crazy, my fear about going crazy, I was actually next to the ER.
I
I was
remember.
actually by the ER, and I actually went to the ER once, and then they just told me to just relax and take my pills. Yeah, it just no, there was no help for me there.
How long ago was that now, Harry? It seems to me it was 2 or 3 years.
It's been, to be honest, 2 years.
2 years, yeah,
Two
yeah.
years, yes, 2 years.
So we met around the same thing that many people who come to me talk about or want to talk about, which is the basic mental obsession and this idea of our mentality being corrupted by thinking that we're doing rather than some outside influence that seems to be attacking us and making it impossible for us to stop because it's doing it to us rather than we doing it.
And then yes, and one thing, I've been living, I've been doing this for decades, and then I
Yes.
found that out 2 years ago, and then I've been actually living in my mind the whole time. I've been
You
in my
thought.
mind the whole time, and then and then I remember speaking with you on my way to my apartment, and I think I remember a little bit of what I said. I said everything looks so real, everything looks so clear, everything the colors look so different. Uh, that's because I was actually in the present. I was actually here. I was not dreaming. I was not thinking at all.
Yeah.
And then when all this happened, I was I remember actually saying too, I feel so empty. I feel so empty because I was always attached to anything. And then when my mind, when I think my mind, there was one person and one thing that I was always attached to, my daughter and work. And then when my mind actually became evil, became so destructive. I wasn't even thinking about my daughter. I was so aggressive. I think that was anxiety. And then work. I just didn't like going to work anymore. It just took away my daughter and work, and I was just so I had nothing. I had nothing. I was just empty, and then I was afraid
Yeah.
because I was by myself. I had nothing to be attached to. So I thought I was going crazy because I was always attached to anything, and then when I felt so empty, when I felt here, when I was just
Mhm.
here, I was just living. I was not used to that. I wasn't used to that. I was always in the future or in the past. I was
Well, and
always
those
thinking
are
about,
addictions. Those are
yes,
addictions to ideas that aren't happening as though they're all that's happening. And so
yes,
we call it our reality as though it's distinct from reality, which would mean there is no other reality. And so all we are is what we're thinking. And as you said, you seem to be living in your mind, which
yes,
is really just thinking about your thinking. It isn't actually living in your mind. It's just so preoccupied with your thinking about your thinking that you think that's all that's happening. It's an intoxication with the capacity we have to fantasize and to imagine, which is an extraordinary asset until we make believe it's our reality and then feel condemned to it. And literally will cut off all of the value that we have with others and the potential we have to be productive, to try to prove that we can survive that reality because it's the only reality we think we know. And
yes,
what do
that's
we
true.
do? We're salvaging all, we're really deteriorating our capacity to function at all in the name of thinking we're going to somehow turn that thinking into truth and reality.
Yes, and then you actually said it correctly. It's like an addiction. It's just, and I knew when I was going through this, I would just play with my mind. I was like, what if I don't think about anything for a few seconds, 10 seconds? And I was like, wow, this is great. but I was so addicted to it. I just couldn't
Yeah,
stop thinking. So I would just
right.
go back in my mind, and then and everything starts again. And I just couldn't help it, but to be in my mind. But then eventually, I kind of trained my mind to like be here, and then it just like my I just I went through my whole life. Like it's like my mind went through my whole life, like from like when I was, I guess, a little kid, and then all the way to here. I thought about all the mistakes, and then when I was going through this, I would just it was I wasn't even I knew I had an anxiety issue, but
Mhm,
depression was just new to me. Depression was just I just couldn't. To be honest, I just didn't know how to handle depression.
mhm.
It was just
So it's
insane.
it's kind of like drugs or drinking. At first, it seemed like we could control it because we weren't doing it that much, and then our tolerance for it increased because we were tolerant of it. We needed more and more and more, and eventually, it gets to the point where the body can't handle it at all. It may be
True,
that that point was well earlier, but the use of it gets to a point where we finally are just on our hands and knees and throwing up and sick and diseased and completely incapacitated. And my sense is that's a cry for help. We're actually causing that naturally because we're going down a road that is impossible to ever maintain, is impossible to ever survive because there's no life in it. It's all just thought life. It's a concept of life. It's a concept of self that doesn't exist except to the thinking we do about the thinking itself. So you're describing too, what's interesting, Harry, is think about the fact that people, when they talk about dying, begin to see their whole life pass before them, right?
yes,
And you witnessed it while you were alive because what you were watching die is the ego that you thought was who you were. You were literally allowing those thoughts when your experience, and I remember talking to you about this because you had a great sense of clarity in the midst of the manic depression that you were facing. But as that becomes obvious or more obvious, the idea of maintaining it becomes less interesting. And all of a
hmm,
sudden, the fear attached to it, rather than running from it and attaching to things that give you the impression that you're anchored outside of it, all of a sudden you're witnessing the actual fear and anxiety and stress that you've been causing. And that can be horrifying. And in the death of that awareness, that thing you described begins to happen where you look at your whole life and see the pattern that's been going on since as far back as you can remember. That's been the same basic thread of insanity, induced insanity, I would call it, operating as though it was our reality, as though it identified us, that it defined us as people, as an individual. And as that begins to die, you actually have clarity. Like you said, the colors changed.
yes,
It
I
isn't
know.
because they weren't, it isn't because the colors changed, it's because your perception of them became accurate rather than misperceiving them as your perception or misunderstanding them as your understanding.
True, yeah. Everything. I think it was just anxiety. Everything was so foggy. Like everything was moving so fast. I
Yeah,
was so, I was so used to that.
yeah.
But then when I started to hear things around me, I was just like, it just everything looks so like here. It's like I'm here. You know, I mean, I was afraid of that too. And then
Yes.
that was, I think,
Well,
pretty much anxiety. And then you also talk about images. Images about I get images, and then I get an image in my head, and then I actually create a story based on this image, and that's actually used to scare me a lot because I used
you're
to get
making a
really.
movie.
Yes, I would just get that's how you know what, that's how some people talk about suicidal thoughts,
Yes,
but I would never see my face there.
right.
It just
But you could notice the presence of the horror in that to the degree that it seemed to be a haunting representation of something. Something seemed, in my experience, something always seems wrong, and it's very present. And yet I look around and don't see the wrong. So I start to assign wrong to the things I see to make sense of something that I can't perceive, that I'm not perceiving as something I'm doing. So I immediately think of it as something happening out there with everyone and everyone everywhere else, which the story attaches to.
Yes, yes, true. Yeah, that's actually but that was actually one of my addictions. Yes, I would just like I would be like if I didn't like anything or didn't like something, I would just try and look for a different outcome in my mind. But then I would just like, let's say I was having a job interview and it didn't go well. I would just go back in my mind and try to make it right, and then I would just be okay with this outcome for about maybe an hour, and then all of a sudden, boom! What if that doesn't happen? And I would start thinking about another different outcome as well too, and then I would be in my mind for like hours, sometimes days. But then I started to actually see the pattern. Like it just there's so many outcomes, and then I was just so addicted to it. I was so addicted to being in my mind.
Well, and what's interesting, my sense, if I have any sense of this that's accurate, my sense is our mind is something we all share, and our brain is something we each have.
Hmm.
So when we talk about having our own reality, we're assigning the mind to the brain rather than realizing the brain is where we think, but the mind is who we are and what we think from. So if I'm thinking about my brain as reality, I'm thinking that mind, that capital mind, that pure consciousness, that pure being awareness that is our present state of awareness, each of ours and all of ours, because we share it. It's not something I have and you don't have. It's just simply something I either choose to express or don't choose to express. And addiction is the idea that it's not there and that my mind all of a sudden becomes my brain and that I all of a sudden become the reality of my thoughts and that I only become my thoughts. So all of a sudden I become a self that seems separate from me, which we say
Hmm.
things like, I am thinking to myself, I am thinking about myself, when we're really thinking about our thoughts. But since we think they define us in that other alternate world that we've created, we call it mind, we call it life. We say life is complicated when what we're really saying is my thinking about life is very complicated. Because I'm not thinking about life, I'm thinking only about what I'm thinking about life.
Yes, true. Yes.
So we create experience, not reality. We manifest effects. They aren't real, they're simply bodily sensations that are like alarm systems that tell us when we're on a path that is undermining our ability to survive and thrive.
And then, why do you think I went through this? Why was it was just my body couldn't take it anymore, or just
Well, tell me a little bit about your sobriety. Are you drinking? Are you drugging? Are you doing any of that?
so? When I went through this, I went to see a psychiatrist. I was taking because I remember saying I couldn't sleep. My
Right.
anxiety was just too bad, and I couldn't sleep. And then I was prescribed a pill to for my anxiety and to go to sleep just to take it before bed.
Mhm.
And I took that for about a week, 10 days. I didn't like how I felt after the next day. So,
Right.
but it helped me reset my sleep pattern. So I went back to sleeping, and then I was taking I started taking Paxil, yes. And I took that for 3 months, and then I stopped taking it, and then I got another. I became a little anxious again, and then I went back. But I took that for a year. So my last time I took that was about 3 months ago, a little
Mhm.
over 3 months ago. But I realized that even taking this wasn't even helping. Wasn't even helping. I mean, wasn't even helping. It might have helped, I guess, for a bit, but it was just my way of thinking.
Well,
It just
if the use of a drug helps you gives you a little bit of a reprieve from the intensity and that concentrated sense of completely being incapacitated by your mentality. And there's growth mentally, just like the growth of an alcoholic starting to see that alcohol isn't doing them any good. It's actually been a problem the whole time while they've been thinking of it as a solution. When you begin to see things accurately, you can actually take advantage of the opportunity. Same with alcohol. When I started noticing that I'd never drank responsibly, I'd never drank like people who don't have the metabolic inability to metabolize sugar. I drank when I started, I just kept drinking and drinking and drinking, and I would drink massive quantities. I didn't do it all the time, but when I did it, that's what I did.
I
And
see.
in that same way, it gave me finally the evidence to start saying something's wrong here. I can't seem to handle this. And I knew it, I just hadn't admitted it. I knew something was wrong all along. I couldn't admit it. I could have admitted it, I just didn't admit it. The fact was, I thought my circumstances and that story that I developed was sufficient not to allow me to admit it because I kept thinking it was the solution. And really, what I was doing was numbing myself, desensitizing my body
Mm-hmm.
with denial and all the other willingnesses I had to do the wrong thing in the name of claiming it was the only thing I could do. So when I don't think I'm doing what I'm doing, what I have found is that I immediately think there is absolutely nothing I can do about it. And as a result, there's no solution. So what do I feel? Horrified, stuck, completely disemboweled, disabled, incapacitated.
Yes, I know, and I think that's why I don't know if it was helping me. I mean, it helped me for a little bit, I think, but I think I knew that it was just me overthinking, and then just being in the past, just being in the past too much or in the future. But I decided to stop taking it, and then I think everything's going well so far. Before I would just then after this I would just be like I was always very like a lonely person. But then after I went through this, and I want to be around people, you know. I want to talk to other people, and then I want to be I became more friendly. It just it just being around people. It's just that I mean that's one of the things that I like to.
And where you came to me originally through somebody who was sober, didn't you? Did we meet at a meeting?
Yes, that was Everett.
Yeah, right. That's right. So Everett recognized in you what he was doing and sent you in my direction because that's what I work on with people.
Yes, yeah, I know. I was going
Yeah,
through a lot. I was going through a lot, yeah, about two
yeah.
years ago.
And how's your daughter today?
She's great. She's great. Yeah, she's 9 years old right now.
Good.
Yeah, yeah, she's great. And then like it just you know, it just we used to spend a lot of time in let me tell you about what my mind was doing with my daughter. It's just because when I moved to Chicago, uh, I was so my daughter we used to live in I used to live in Southern California,
Right.
so I was away from my daughter for quite a bit uh, because I needed to be with my family. And then but I used to spend a lot of time in Disneyland with my daughter. But I remember the last time I went to Disneyland with my daughter, it was just very painful because most of the songs would remind me of my daughter, would take me back to the past. And then, but I remember when I came to Chicago, I would just go to sleep and then wake up the next day with songs reminding me of my daughter. That was insane. It would drive me crazy.
Right.
I would just wake up and this song would just play. The song was just playing in my mind. It was like I was like, no, I can't be doing this. I would just freak out and then get up right away. And that's why I say it's like, why did my mind turn against me? It was like it was just painful. It was just very painful to see all these images about my daughter, and I'm not with her. Uh, but the song would just kill me all the time, every morning. But at some point, I needed to face all those songs because I knew, like I wouldn't listen to those songs. But eventually, I would just force myself to listen to the songs. I know it would remind me of my daughter, but I needed to face him. I just couldn't get away. I just couldn't, because every time I would just stop thinking about it, it would just, my mind would just go even more. I would just even think about it even more.
It's like
And then
building a dam. If you
I
build
think
a
so.
dam and the water flows, the water behind it's going to grow. It's going to
Yes,
climb. And if you don't drain the dam, it's going to overflow it and break it down. Those are nervous breakdowns.
yes. At some point, I was like, I gotta listen to it. I gotta listen to these songs
Yeah.
because it would just drive me crazy.
Yeah.
And then eventually those thoughts went away. The songs wouldn't bother me anymore. Uh, I don't know why I went through that. It just for me right now trying to make sense. It gives me a little bit of stress. So I'm just taking it. I'm just that, that's why I decided to talk to you again because to be honest, I'm not fully recovered, but I know sometimes my mind gets really cloudy, and I know when to stop. I was like, oh, this is going on. I know what's happening. I know what's about to happen. I need to
Right.
get away. I need to get away from this. And
So
then
let
I
me
become
go ahead.
no. It just that it's just very. I know what one thing that every told me when you know when your mind gets a little crowded or you get something that you need to do something. It just if you let it grow, if you let it get really dark, I know it's just the fear of going back 2 years ago. It's kind of like I'm being honest. It kind of like I'm a little afraid.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
yes.
Well, for good reason. I will tell you that that's for good reason. If you weren't afraid and you didn't suffer, those things that were killing you would be naturally your instincts. And what's interesting in this induced mental state of insanity is that instincts get completely turned around backwards. What's designed to save us and protect us and have us do things in ways that are secure us are actually the things that are threatening us in this case. It's not a bear chasing us and we know to run as fast as possible, try to get up a tree that's bigger than it can climb, right? Those things become clear when you're actually facing a real threat. This threat is internal, it's self induced by a self that doesn't even exist, it's self imposed by ideas that have no basis other than in the basis we consistently give them by thinking about them as though they're real. And one of the things you've done this morning is to describe it as happening when it happens, as though it has a life, as though it's a thing apart from you. So it seems to be happening to you and you don't know how to control it. And in fact, that thing has no control whatsoever. So the more you try to control it, the more you're making believe there's something there to control. It's just an imagined idea that you have made believe is true. And it's not just you, my friend. I am not recovered from this either.
Oh, I
The
see.
reason I talk about this, Harry, is because I want to get better in my own mental health and I want to see the world as the potential it has for all the possibility for all of us, rather than thinking solely about me getting better for my purposes. Because that world you said all of a sudden became friendlier and you became friendlier to it is the entire species that we are a part of. It isn't some segmented, disparate dream somewhere else in some other place we can't get to. We are surrounded by people. There's 8.5 billion people right now. That's a lot of humans. And to
Yeah.
think of them as any less than all of them is to think, I don't have to talk to them all to think of them all. And if we've been doing something as a species that's simply wrong and seems to be right, because everywhere we look, we see it happening, and it seems as a result of that information we're getting to be the only thing we can do. And what we keep doing is something we know better to do than to do because we have the feelings of being afraid. We're being told by our feelings something's wrong. Fear and pain are evidence of something being wrong, period. That's how disease tells us something's wrong. Our kidney hurts, our liver hurts, our heart hurts, our shoulders hurt. All those pains are talking about something in the body that isn't right. That's our guidance. It's like our dashboard, and we're out of oil, and the light comes on, and we're addicted to the idea that the dashboard has nothing of that. There's no purpose for the dashboard whatsoever, and we're just going to keep driving. We're not going to pay attention to the lights and keep going. So we've been diminishing our capacity to actually notice that we're very sensitive to what's going on. And to try to numb, what I found is I was numbing myself. I was trying to dumb down my sentient awareness, which is actually sensitivity, is in fact awareness, and awareness is intelligence. So it literally makes no sense to think I'm less intelligent by dumbing my experience down and going numb to it, because that basically is defining somebody that doesn't exist or is dead. Their bodies have no sensitive nature to them anymore when a sentient being dies. When the body dies of the being, what does it do? It doesn't feel. What do they look for when they come and see if they try to figure out whether they're dead or alive? They look for signs, for responses, signs of life. Is he breathing? They put a mirror up and try to see if there's any moisture coming out of the body. There may be no movement. They can't tell otherwise. So those signs of life we're getting that are pointing to things that are wrong, when we think of them as things to get away from, the water behind the dam is just building up and building up and building up. It's like misdiagnosing a disease. If you have a brain tumor and the doctor says you have a headache, here's Tylenol, the tumor is not going to get better because you feel better for a minute. It's going to continue to get worse.
Yeah, true that. And that's actually great, because when I was back in California, I was just hiding all my everything. I was just hiding everything. Let me open my cats here. Yeah, I was just hiding everything under the carpet, like how I would describe it, and then everything came out just to haunt me. Everything came out, and that's when I had my mental breakdown.
So let me make a suggestion about that. Nothing was ever hidden except to the thought you had that you thought it was hidden.
Yes, true that, and true that. There was nothing ever hidden. It was all in my mind.
Right.
That's what I eventually found out. It was just insane. It was just, sometimes I laugh about it, but it was just all in my mind, and then life is great, life is great. Sometimes I became very aware, like the other day, something happened that I didn't like, but I'm so used to touching it. Just touch it. Don't think about it, and then that creates a lot of problems in my mind.
Right.
But if but I know my mind was so used to not facing my mistakes. I was so used to touching my thoughts, my mistake, and then by doing that, it would just create a lot of anxiety. But if I'm aware about what I did wrong and everything, it just I don't get anxious anymore.
Yeah.
It's just.
Well, to be responsible for it is to be response-able, meaning we're responding according to what's happening, honestly, about what's happening, rather than thinking it shouldn't be happening. And as a result, thinking it's happening to us rather than being caused by us. And as a result, thinking there's nothing at all we can do with it. And as a result, we have absolutely no hope whatsoever in ever resolving it. No solution whatsoever. And the fact is, that's correct. If I keep thinking about my thinking as my source, as the only source I have, I'm going to keep thinking those things are impossible to solve because I'm constantly restarting the thing that I'm doing to create those problems over and over and over and over and over again. So much so that I don't even think I'm doing it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I used to think a lot. At some point, I was so afraid to be by myself.
Yeah.
because I was so afraid to be with my thoughts.
Yes.
That was just insane. I just couldn't believe it because most of the time I used to live by myself, but then just being by myself, I just wouldn't. I didn't like that.
So I'm going to
I
give you
didn't.
a couple of things to think about. You may want to make some notes on your phone so you can just
Okay.
go back over them. You have a pretty good memory, but if you want to write them down and then start writing about them, you'll start to see that putting your thoughts on paper gives them some stability and some difference. You can see that you have perspective when they're on paper that you don't always have when you think you have to maintain them constantly in your thoughts. So
Uh-huh.
it gives them a place to live where they stay still for a minute, and then you can help clarify your own understanding of them. Ultimately, my experience is I thought misunderstanding and misperception was understanding and perception, but it wasn't. It was misunderstanding and misperception because the basis of my thinking was my thinking is all I have. It is all that I am. It is reality. And when I see something my way, I can only act in accordance with that. It's all I can do. And if I'm seeing things wrong, my actions were always wrong over and over and over again. They weren't productive. They were toxic. They hurt other people. They didn't lead to the abundant nature of an infinite absolute source. They led to a very limited repetition of activity that was very demoralizing, very upsetting, very sad, very depressing. And they were all induced by thinking that my thinking was reality. So if the basis of my thinking about reality is wrong, how's the rest of my experience going to be? I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to constantly patchwork the wrong that I'm doing in the basis by all thinking I'm going to fix all the thoughts that are coming out of that, rather than noticing it's just one thought I'm really struggling with, and that is that I'm the creator of reality.
That's true. Yeah, it's just one thought that I'm struggling with, and then it keeps if I yeah, it's just one thought, and then I just one thought, it just becomes it's just insane how my mind was so used to that. It's just I was so used to being in my mind the whole time. I was never here, and then
Well,
but
you were
it's
always
great.
there. You were always
Yes,
there thinking you weren't there, just like those things you thought were hidden were never hidden except to the thinking you did about them. And what is worth noting is that a lie only is a lie as long as it's thought to be what it cannot ever be, which is true.
and then yeah, let me no, let me go back a few years ago, and then I knew I had an anxiety issue. I knew, but I was very because I would just have panic attacks. I would be in my room, and then all of a sudden I would just have a panic attack, and just in my room was just so it felt so tight. It just felt I just couldn't breathe in my room. I needed to go out. But I used to play. I used to play with my mind because I used to play with my anxiety every
Yeah,
once in a while. Because you remember, I used to hide things under the carpet. That's how I describe it. And
right.
sometimes I would just look. I would just peek under the
Mhm.
carpet because I wanted to see what's in there, all my fears. And then I would just peek, be there for a few seconds, and then it was just too late for me to get out.
So even while you were thinking you were stuck in those thoughts, you saw that there was flexibility with how you could manipulate your own thinking. You had an
Yes,
awareness that was actually playing with it.
yes, but yeah, but you're right. But at some point, I was just too deep into it,
Yeah,
and I just couldn't get out. I couldn't get out,
right,
and I would just freak out. I would just
right.
run outside, go for a drive, and just be outside for about an hour, 2 hours, and then eventually go back to sleep. Yeah, and then but I would play with it, and I knew I had an anxiety issue, the anxiety problem. Yeah, but I didn't know, like, for me, I didn't know what to do with it. I thought it was just normal. I
All
thought
right,
it
so
was.
let's talk about today because normalizing something that's abnormal is unhealthy, right?
Yes.
If the
Hmm.
idea of trying to get better at managing something that's not manageable and that's insane is the idea, that's what life was about. Hiding everything I was doing that was sick in the name of trying to promote an image that looked healthy,
Hmm.
right? So constantly trying to look like I had it together, constantly trying on the job interviews to seem like I knew what I was doing. But behind the facade, I was always at a loss for what I was doing and where I was going. And at least I felt those things. And largely I felt those things because the thinking I was doing about my thinking was lost because it had no basis in reality. There is no way to recover a basis in reality for something that has no basis in reality. You can't fix it. The fix is seeing that it isn't going to ever be reality, that it isn't reality, that to think of it as reality is to think fantasy is reality. And that's a major problem in thinking. It isn't a problem that is cast on me or that my brain is doing. It's a problem I'm creating by choosing to think the way I'm thinking and continuing addictively to keep thinking that's the only thing I can do.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm continuing to do what's wrong and I think I'm getting better, and what I'm getting better at is what's wrong, then I'm constantly trying to feel better about life when in fact the thinking I'm thinking about life is absolutely no good whatsoever.
That's
So
a great.
I'm trying to overcome that cycle. I'm starting it on one end and trying to stop it on the other and thinking that it's futile. That's addiction.
Yes.
The addict who starts drinking sets the drink cycle in motion. The addict who, or drunk alcoholic who realize they've never had any power over it and just puts the drink down and say, I can drink anytime I want, but I know what's going to happen. I'm no longer interested in that. Now they're free thinking wise. The freedom from alcohol, the freedom from drugs, the freedom from addiction is starting to be honest about what's happening and see that we are actually the players. The one thing we've been given is the freedom to think what we want. And if I'm using that freedom to create an environment that has me think my mind is condemning me, I'm trying to escape responsibility for what I'm choosing to do with my brain. Those are choices I'm making.
Yeah, now I actually make the choice to be here. I know I'm so eager to go in the future. Like my mind is so like used to that, but every time I do that, I get really stressed out, and then I know what's gonna happen. So like I choose I actually make I actually choose to be here. So it's just
Well, let me correct some of that if you don't mind. And I'm going to
yeah.
say some things that will challenge you perhaps. And the challenge isn't to agree with me or believe in it or have faith in it or any of that, just to consider it, start to live with the ideas. When it comes to reality, it isn't a choice. It's just the nature of existence.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think we have to choose it, we think we can unchoose it, which is exactly why we think our thinking is reality and exactly why we think that those fatal decisions we make to consider it reality and those experiences we have that feel so horrifyingly fearful are caused because we know better and we act worse. The only reason we do that is if we were sick mentally, not because reality has condemned us, because reality has given us all possibility to do whatever we want. And if what I'm doing with that loving expanse of possibility is trying only to do the one thing that's impossible, which is turn my thinking into reality, that's a major pitfall in my whole experience because I immediately think I only become my thoughts. And so I have no self-esteem whatsoever because the self I think I become is a lie. And I have no worth whatsoever because there's no value, there's no worthiness in lying. There's no value in lying. So I have no self-worth, no seeming self-worth, no seeming self-value, no seeming self-esteem. And what do I feel? Like shit.
Yeah.
And what you talked about, that emptiness you talked about experiencing earlier is actually noticing when you notice that you're not really full of shit and that the essence of that absolute nature is what you are full of, it becomes very odd to feel so empty because that thing doesn't feel like the weightiness and the depressing nature of all that inner conflict and all that mental anguish. We've used those things to define our experience so long that we think without them we're nothing, rather than realize that the essence of reality is peace and quiet, perfectly still, because it doesn't change. It's not something that's formulated and coming at us or doing anything more or less to us. It's just an absolute present state of awareness that we all have, that we all share, that's the basis of life and nature. It's a fundamental principle, per se, for humans.
Yeah.
And if I think about my thinking as that thing, or being able to block that thing, I think my thinking is more powerful than that thing. And then all of a sudden feel very alone in the universe, not because I'm alone, not because I'm not intimately connected and absolutely present, but because my thinking has no basis in reality. So what I'm feeling is my thought. I'm not feeling reality. I'm feeling the thinking I'm doing about it, because thinking affects us very immediately, causes an effect. If I think I don't like somebody, I all of a sudden start thinking of all the reasons I don't like them.
Yes.
Starts to line up. When I start seeing them, I start seeing things in them that I don't even like more than the thoughts I had about them. It starts adding up, but I'm keeping that all to myself, thinking somehow I'm building a case against the world I'm surrounded by. And it all seems very unfriendly. As you described, you became friendlier with it as you began to peer through and start to see that things that were happening were actually just happening the way they were happening. A little more clarity.
Yeah. Like when I was depressed, I would just wanted to be by myself the
Well,
whole
those
time.
thoughts, those lonely thoughts, when you're trying to manage thoughts that have no basis, to interact with people would mean to subject those thoughts to other thoughts, and those other thoughts are a major threat to your life, because you think that bundle of thoughts you're maintaining is in fact who you are, and that it becomes threatened. Addiction is about reactivity, impulsivity, and compulsivity. And it all starts with a reactive thought is one that is highly charged and defensive and protective, because it has no basis other than constantly being thought of. It isn't, lies don't exist in the universe. And if they do, they have no more power than the lies that exist in our brain that we maintain. They have absolutely no power. They're just thought to have power.
Yes, true that. True, yeah. Yeah, that's just insane. It's so when my mind wants to be in the future, should I how do I go about it? Like
First
it's
of
just
all, your mind doesn't think for you. You've been thinking that it does because you wanted to be irresponsible for what's happening, rather than start to notice that you're the one causing.
or
So if you
yeah,
start noticing you're maintaining thoughts, the point I made about lies, if a lie only exists as long as something that's not true is thought to be true, or something that is true is thought to be untrue, you can see the conflict of that, right?
yes,
Now, within reality, there's no conflict, because reality is just real and truth is just true and life is just life. That's it.
I
It
see.
isn't it isn't fighting with itself and it isn't fighting for itself. It's simply doing what it knows to do. It doesn't think. It's not a process. It's an absolute state of presence. That presence is what I heard you described when you said you had a greater awareness of what was going on was wrong, but you kept interacting with it as though it was wrong, as though the only thing to do was right, was to continue to try to maintain it, and manage it. Because you knew if you didn't on that course, it would completely overrun you. And those panic attacks feel like you're dying,
Yes,
but they're also an awareness of your willingness to begin to notice what you're doing.
I see.
It's actually an awareness of that. When you begin to feel, I got sick and threw up and had a gob of acid, like acidic mucus, come out of my stomach when this all started to occur to me. And I realized that that was the nausea that I'd always felt, the discomfort I'd always felt. And when something really difficult happened, I'd feel that sort of pang in my stomach. And it was this accumulation of acid that my body had developed in my stomach slowly over the years, growing to give me evidence that what I was thinking was wrong was right. Because I'd say, yeah, I feel it. I feel sick. But I didn't realize what I was feeling was the sick thought that was creating the physical manifestation. And it was a gob as big as my fist that came out in the toilet. And once that was gone, I never felt that thing again that same way. I now notice it, but it doesn't build like it did because I'm noticing more of what I'm doing. I don't notice it all, but I notice it enough to start noticing that if it's happening, I have something to do with it. It's a choice I'm making that's causing it. It isn't some vicarious thing that's being forced on me, because if it was, there would be somebody else in the room doing it to me. And most of my experience is just me being wherever I am and those things happening in my thinking. I see it now as my dashboard, my GPS. Those discomforts are telling me I'm thinking something that isn't right and I'm thinking it's right. They're giving me a sense of imbalance to say you're witnessing, experiencing a thought that has no balance because it has no place in reality. It's always going to be more or less. It's always going to be there or then in my thinking, right? So I'm always going to put it in the past that doesn't exist except to my thoughts, or into the future that doesn't exist. Because when the past was in the past, it was the present. And when the future comes, it's the present. So the present is where we always are, regardless of where we think, what we think. So to begin to notice that is to start to say, okay, I'm in the present thinking about the future. That's easy. I can do that. But when I think I am in the future, that's once again me thinking my thought is so real that I can void reality, that I'm more powerful than all reality. And I'm actually escaping reality. That's just a delusion. It's just an illusion acting as reality, which is a delusion. That is an induced form of insanity.
Yes, I used to do that all the time.
I still do it every day to some degree. There are thoughts I have that still weigh on me. I know those thoughts without having to figure out what they are. I don't ask to give a description, because what I find is when I'm really willing to have them, they will explain to me what it is I've been lying about or misperceiving or misunderstanding. But as long as I'm willing to pretend I have nothing to do with them, I create the blindness. I create the sense of irresponsibility. I create the numbness to make believe I don't know any better. Those are things I do actively. So the information is always there. How willing I am to face it and grow in the face of it is often determined by how well my circumstances are going. If my circumstances are desperate because I've created desperate circumstances, I'm going to feel little room to confront things in the biggest and best way, in the most honest way. Because if somebody was choking me and I was suffocating, or I was underwater for 2 or 3 minutes, I probably wouldn't be thinking a lot about obsessive thinking. I would be thinking about how to get air. I would have an actual need rather than a presupposed idea about what I need.
Yes.
So it begins to, the clarity has always been there. Reality has always been real. Truth has always been true. It's always been our nature. And we've been thinking unnaturally, unhealthy, sick, diseased thoughts. Why? Because if the absolute nature of being, if the absolute nature of nature, if the absolute nature of truth and reality is at perfect peace, at perfect ease, perfectly silent, then any ripple that we create is noticeable and we're aware of it. And it
Yes.
doesn't mean we can't or shouldn't do that. But if we think by doing that, that peace is doing it to us, we are once again trying to be irresponsible for the actions we're taking that are causing the effects we're manifesting and struggling with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at some point I became very everything was just so calm, and then it was just silent, you know. And
Yeah.
I wasn't so used to that. That was just would freak me out.
Well,
That would freak me out. I would just I thought I was going crazy
but
just because of that.
let's say all the things that you're doing are 100 feet wide, and you've been thinking they're only 6 feet wide, and all of a sudden you see that they're a foot wide.
Yes.
That growth in awareness, again, seems like all that you're doing. But if during time you've been doing just that by thinking the new awareness is all that there is, and missing the fact that if you can pretend that what's happening isn't happening to a small degree, you could pretend that what's happening isn't happening to every other degree and start noticing that as beings, we have a capacity that is enormous compared to the dumbed down, numb version that we go by in these depressed, pitiful, demoralized states of physical expression.
Yes.
So if there's more, it's only because I keep thinking that some new expanded limit is even bigger rather than begin to realize that there are no limits whatsoever except the ones I create. That's all I ever struggle with are the limits. The idea is that the limits of my thought are in fact the limits of reality. And since they're not, I'm immediate, no matter how big they get, doesn't matter. I can think I'm a universal thinker and forget that there's quite a bit beyond the universe for the universe to be expanding. There must be something else there. And that something else that seems to be out there beyond it must also be here right now, right where we are with us in absolute form, not in some come and go, little or more or less, any of that stuff. An absolute reality that is not disputable. And yet we are capable of pretending it is and thinking that thinking will overcome it, diminish it, increase it, etc. To think I need to increase reality is to think that I've decreased it. And once again, I'm on a bend of thinking. Thinking is reality for it to even have that capacity to think it can actually bend reality or twist reality or convert reality into something other than a difficult experience that I'm manifesting by thinking about it that way. Incorrectly, dishonestly.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Now every time I feel a little stressed out, you know what really helped me a lot is just being aware of it, and then going outside, going for a walk.
Yeah.
It just helps. It just helps a lot. Just being
So
aware of it.
if you know there are things you can be aware of, begin to realize that you're already aware of everything. The only thing you've been struggling with is thinking that those limits that you're describing, if you can make them better, you're the one that's been making them worse.
Yes.
Right? So if you've been making them worse chronically your whole life and you actually start taking walks and realize, oh, I can make them better, you're admitting that you were a yoga master mentally because now you're flexible. You don't have any constraints with your muscles. You're realizing that this thing has been an accordion the whole time, and I'm the one pushing and pulling on it and developing the music or the disharmony that I'm creating.
Yes, true. Yes, I know. Yeah, you're right. But I was so addicted to it. I was so addicted to having. I was having the perfect life, but in my mind.
Yes.
It was just so perfect in my mind, but I was so addicted to it that I was aware of it, but I just sometimes I didn't like reality, but my mind would just make it better.
Well, keep in mind, what you didn't like was the reality you thought was real rather than actual reality, because there's no, if the essence of, it's kind of like the fact that we don't have a choice to be real, to be true, to have life, we don't have a choice. But what's interesting is if I don't have a choice in other things, I feel condemned by the lack of ability to get that thing I want to choose. But in this case, how could I possibly be condemned by something that's everything? If I already have everything and I've been thinking reality is mine, I've been thinking I don't have reality. So I've been thinking about reality incorrectly and thinking that the reality I'm struggling with is reality, when in fact it's just a mirror image of the thinking I'm doing about reality.
Can I tell you something funny? You know, after that, like you see me, like all these years, I didn't know what I looked like, to be honest. Yes, it is funny because I would see myself as a different person.
Yes.
Like I started to see myself, my eyes, like it is funny, right? Because I see myself every day, but in my mind, I was next to the mirror, like 2 years, like a little over 2 years ago. I would see me as a different person. I wouldn't see this. I wouldn't see this. So that's
think about,
that's how
Eric,
addicted I was. Yeah.
Think about that. That's natural. That's the program right there. That's the mental illness, is making believe that how we think things are is how things are. Well, things have always been as they are, regardless of what we thought. Reality didn't all of a sudden come into being when I was born. It was here before humanity existed. It was here during a time we didn't even think. And yet we have the audacity and the grandiosity to imagine that our thinking is reality and that we're constantly creating our reality. And we constantly have a reality which has been used to justify killing and suppressing and oppressing other people because they don't share the same seeming reality, when it isn't reality at all. It's just thinking. It's a thought.
Yes. That's
So
great. Yeah.
seeing the humor in it, Harry, is also seeing that bubble that seems so definitive that we have to protect at all costs, that we can beat and batter and it never seems to go away, and yet a pinprick popped it like that. And the pinprick is just saying, oh, it's just a thought. It's imagined.
I know.
It is nothing more than made up in my own imagination.
It's
fantasy.
It is fantasy. Yes, yes. I was so used to it. And then sometimes it becomes real. I know, I'm being honest. Sometimes it becomes so real again, but I'm very aware of it. And I was like, yeah, I know what's going on. And
so to the degree it seems to be real is the degree to which you're maintaining ideas that are not real and not true. So what I've learned is that's the part of me that is lying. And so I've buried it under the carpet like you used to. I think if I hide it in the dark, it's not there. And yet I still have a haunting suspicion something's wrong. It's like kids, you turn the lights on for kids when they're afraid of ghosts, and there's never any ghosts there. But when you turn the lights off, they think there are because there might be, because they can't tell. And you turn the lights on, and all of a sudden they're okay. You turn the lights off, they have to sleep with the light on because they want proof, they want evidence. It's they're thinking about what's happening. If there are ghosts, and I imagine that spirits may have some level of existence, I don't know, nor do I need to know. What I've learned is that whatever things are is what they are. And what I think of them, when I think my thinking is true and real, will probably not be as true and real as what they are, making what I think not true or real at all. And if I live in concert with that awareness, I start noticing things like you're describing that I never paid any attention to.
Yes.
Because I've been paying attention only to what I thought of things rather than the things I was claiming to pay attention to. Those things, if they exist, are in a relationship with us. And they will tell us all about them because all they are is what they are if we're willing to be with them as they are. We get the information of them. And then thinking naturally begins to be intuitive because wisdom is intuition. Wisdom isn't trying to make believe I'm the creator of reality. Wisdom is the expression of reality. It's actually the knowingness we have that begins to seep through us because we're not busy trying to make believe it isn't there. We are not obstructed in reality. We are simply obstructed in our mentality, in thinking that reality is all we think it is. And when we think that, fear gets great. I would suggest to you, when you start noticing that, begin to imagine the thought that you're starting to be willing to face those things you thought were so deeply buried that you would never get to and never want to face. And those fears are actually telling you you're starting to honestly face things that will dissipate as you do, rather than get greater and greater charge, build up of tension and stress in your body if you don't. You just see them dissipate.
Yeah, yes. Every time I went back to where I used to live in California, I went there a few months ago. I didn't want to face anything. I didn't want to face anything, but because that would create a little bit of stress. But now I'll be there in 2 weeks. But you know what I've been doing? I've been facing those fears, and then I noticed that I found peace.
Well, it was never lost.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's kind of like we decided we hated stop signs, and kept getting into accidents.
Yes.
And have near misses all the time and wondering, why is this? Why is this? Why? We've decided that anxiety is something we shouldn't have rather than say, wait a minute, my body's telling me there's something wrong with what's happening around me. If there's a bear 20 feet away and I don't notice it, my body does, I will get an awareness that something's wrong somewhere. If I'm not sensitive to that, I'm going to pay no attention to it. When in fact, it's my body actually functioning at a level well beyond what I can even think it can do for me to be dismissing it so quickly as something I have nothing to do with and can't take any value from.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I eventually found out that everything was in my mind, even with those songs that was the songs that were playing in my mind.
Yeah.
It would just, I was just creating everything.
Yeah.
It was just me. It was just very much just me. And then, but at that time, I would always think everything was so painful. My life wasn't great. But when I was going through this, I would just think about the negative thoughts.
Of
I was
course.
so negative. I was so negative. But eventually, I started to remember the good things about my life. After all this, I was like, wow, this was great. But at that time, my mind was so pessimistic. It's just so
You know what comes with negative automatically?
no.
Positive.
Oh,
Throughout the entire universe, they're absolutely connected. Now, maybe not at the subatomic level. Things happen at the level that's so elementary to the nuclear makeup of the universe that not everything functions in that same way there. But within the realm that we're operating in, the human realm, the spatial realm, the time and space realm, everything has an opposite. And it also has everything in between and everything beyond in every direction. So the intimate nature of our connection is that we're connected to it all of it all the time. We're aware of it all the time because we're connected to it all the time. We don't have to think about what's beyond the horizon for everything beyond the horizon to be doing what it's doing right now. And when I start thinking of it in that way, the most general way, I have no collision. There's no conflict because I'm simply in a general way admitting the simplest aspect of things. If everything that's happening right now is happening, and I get used to the fact that everything that happens has always been happening in the present, I don't have, when my expectations are dashed, I realize it's just the thought I had about what would happen that I'm struggling with, not reality or truth. It's just a thought I had about an expectation I had because I thought the truth was I thought the thought was true, and I thought the only thing that should come from that thought is the thing I originally imagined I would get when I had that thought. So
yeah.
consider that there is no past or future other than in memory and thought. We just remember that. And it's never remembered how it happened because if what happened was happening with everything that was happening, certainly we're not remembering every single detail of everything that was happening in that moment. And yet to be preoccupied by trying to create a story about it, we're actually here in the present with all those details, with all those circumstances, with all those consequences, with all those interactive actions happening everywhere around us, and pretending that's all that's important is something that isn't happening somewhere else, with someone else, some other time, some other place. There's no such thing. It's always here, it's always now. Not to suggest we can't think of those things and that it doesn't help to think of those things when we're planning and creating goals and learning from mistakes. All that kind of stuff's valuable. But if we think of it as a reality, we're undermining our potential to actually interact with reality and express reality and start functioning on a basis that's absolutely certain and guaranteed, rather than guarantee the misery and the consequences we're afraid of creating because the thought we're thinking is doomed and wondering why we think the future is doomed, rather than notice it's the present experience that I'm trying to deflect and avoid and hide from addictively, than say my thought is doomed right now. If I'm feeling doom in the future, it's because the thinking I'm doing it right now is doomed.
Yeah, and let me tell you another story too. Remember I told you I was so afraid to be by myself with my thoughts.
Yes.
So about a year ago, I actually got a hotel room because I wanted to face my fear. I wanted to be there by myself. About a year, yeah, a little over a year, and I couldn't do it. I got the room, but I couldn't do it. So I ran away. But recently, about a few months ago, no, a little over, about 7 months ago, I did it. No, I did it, and then nothing happened, and I felt so great. It just, I was just creating everything. It just, everything was just, there was nothing to fear. I was just, it was just, everything was in my mind. I woke up the next day and I was like, here I am. I just felt the present. I just felt the present. I was just, here I am. That nothing. If I don't, it just felt like.
Well, what's interesting,
I felt so peaceful.
If you don't cause the fear, there's nothing to face.
Yes.
And when you begin to admit you're causing it, you faced
Yes.
it completely, and all of a sudden it makes no sense to continue. The freedom.
Yes, it makes no sense. So I just, no more fear. It's just, I was causing it.
Yeah.
It was just me. And
Now,
then
I still experience fear, but it's a guidance system for something wrong in my environment. And if the majority of what I'm witnessing is being caused as the experience of my body, what I've come to realize is that there's something wrong in my thinking that I'm fearing. And rather than see it as something to try to stop or escape, I've begun to see it as actually an instinctual value that's telling me there's not a bear outside of me that's attacking me that I know to run from. It's a thought that if I run from it, I'm going to take it with me wherever I go. The difference in dealing with mentality and actual fears is that I can put distance between me and the ones that are actually happening in the world. I can't put any distance between the one I'm creating in my own head. So the further I go, the hotel rooms, the 3,000-mile drives, parachuting, whatever I do, doesn't take them away. It actually allows me to see them and witness them and stay with them. And I can feel I'm stuck with them, but really what I'm stuck with is a brain in a skull thinking. Yes. And I am the one choosing what it's doing. If I can create it and manifest those effects, I can also choose not to create those effects. But as long as I say there are things I have to stop doing, I'm lying about the fact that I don't have to stop doing them at all, because I'm absolutely free to choose them. And when I get that point in, all of a sudden it makes no sense, because I'm no longer preoccupied with a fight to stop them. I'm simply looking at them accurately and realizing I have no obligation to continue whatsoever, never did, never have. It was all the presumption I had about, the positions I needed to take to fight them, rather than realize that any position I take confirms all other possible positions. It does not exclude any other position. I can't take a position in opposition to anything, because what I do by taking that position is confirm that everyone everywhere can take whatever position they want.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than think of the world as something that needs to accommodate me, I begin to actually accommodate the entire world and allowing them to do what they're already free to do. And it isn't my business to determine otherwise, but I can think about it accurately and I can be honest about it simultaneously.
That's great. Yeah, and then that's great. And then after all this, like I mentioned before, I'm not fully recovered, but eventually, like I go back. But now I'm aware of it. I know the pattern. Now I know when to stop. I know when to go outside. I know just becoming more aware of it. It just helps a lot. It just, and I'm not gonna lie. I've been the other day. I actually kind of like went back to overthinking. And the next day, I was like, I can't be doing this anymore. I don't want to do this, because I was being I was just so stressed out.
Let me give you a suggestion.
Uh-huh.
You've probably been thinking you haven't wanted to do it for as long as you've been doing it, right?
Yes.
So I would suggest to you, if you're responsible, you've always wanted to do it, and then use thinking you shouldn't be doing it as an attempt to prove thinking was more powerful than what you were choosing.
Uh-huh.
So if you simply say, if I'm experiencing it, I want to be doing it. Because if I'm free to want whatever I want and think whatever I want, I'm free to want what I think. And if I stop thinking of it as something I shouldn't be doing and start saying, obviously, I'm doing it. And now I start thinking about it as something that I must want to do to have it happening. Now I have no fight with it. There's no continuation of it. There's no bubble to pop because I'm no longer in conflict. I'm no longer isolating a thought as though it has a real world, a sphere. And if you think about bubbles, you know, the bubbles we blew as kids?
Yes.
Remember how on the outside they're like a mirror?
Yeah, yes.
Imagine if you were in the bubble, it would be a convex mirror, and everywhere you would look you would only see yourself everywhere. So this idea of self-centeredness has us at the center of that bubble, and it isn't itself, it's just a thought. We are thinking about a thought itself, and we've determined that's ourself. And we're in that little bubble that all it needs is a pinprick of thought to pop in. Because it isn't really there except to the thought that we think it's real. So my suggestion is to embrace the anxiety, start to hold it like it's a 9-year-old, like your 9-year-old daughter when she's struggling and doesn't need her to tell you it's her, doesn't want you to say it's okay when she knows for her experience it's not okay, but simply wants to be held. And when you begin to realize that you can hold those thoughts, you can have those thoughts, you can also not have those thoughts just as easily. Because you'll see that you're not in conflict with them. You're not thinking it isn't something. If I'm doing something and thinking I shouldn't be doing it while I'm doing it, I'm creating an impossible dilemma because I'm the starter and the seeming stopper constantly. I keep starting over and over and over again. I try to stop over and over again. It isn't about stopping, it's about starting. It's about seeing that if I'm doing it, if I'm witnessing it, I'm responsible for it, period. Yes. And when I started living with that, I started noticing the fear, and the fear dissipated like fog when the sun comes out. It just started to go away. It didn't need to be resolved because it didn't need a resolution, because it would literally evaporate. And all of a sudden, I just wouldn't do that because I would be in an awareness that was actually accommodating the greater capacity I have rather than the lesser capacity I have to diminish and reduce and seem to concentrate on things microscopically. Now I'm in the macroscopic, telescopic view of my experience.
Yes, I understand it.
So if you have something, you can let something go. You can't let go of something you don't have, and you won't let go of something you don't think you have. Because to think you don't have it and to let go of it would be to admit you have it, and your lie would be revealed. And lies are always defensive, always reactive, always very sensitive, because they're rubbing and rubbing and rubbing and rubbing the wound of this idea that all we are is what we think.
True, yes. That's great, yeah. And after all this, I became more open. Like I talk to people a lot.
Yeah.
I like talking to people. And I don't know, it's just great. It's just great being like this, you know.
I heard a guy say once who was a Jesuit priest, I believe. So they're very well educated. And somebody asked him what he was reading, and he said, I stopped reading when I started listening to people. What greater not fantasy, but what greater fantastic experience is there to begin to really commune with the community of humanity that we have and think of each other in ways that far exceed the pitiful ideas and the vengeful ideas and the spiteful ideas we have about people, and start to see the capacity we have as something that is unbound once we begin realizing the nature of an absolute source is not limited whatsoever. It isn't even in time and space. It's completely beyond this realm that we're in, and yet it's also completely within it. So it's accessible, it's in reach, it is absolutely our present state of being right now, in every respect. So you have the awareness. The only thing you have that counters that is thinking you don't have the awareness.
Yeah.
And if you didn't, you wouldn't suffer. That's the proof that you're aware. If the thing you're doing was the only thing you could do and the best thing you could do, you would be celebrating the pain and the sorrow and the anxiety and the fear. But we don't celebrate it. Nobody ever comes to me and says, help me feel worse and think more negative thoughts. I'm really struggling with both of those.
No.
Why would that be if something we were doing that we didn't think we were doing was better? In fact, it's worse. And to get better at what's worse is to think feeling better about it is a cure, when that's exactly what addiction is. Trying to constantly feel better about something that's not better, that's wrong.
Yes.
It's a bad plan for survival, and we have as many diseases as have ever been recognized on this planet, from what I can tell. And if not, they're the culmination of everything wrong we've ever done physically, and actions we've taken that have polluted in any way. Not saying that we've completely contaminated the earth, but certainly we've caused some contamination. And those reflections are the earth we're living on today. They're the foods we're eating, and they're the consequences of the air that we are breathing. And this moment right now is the sum total of everything that has ever happened, anywhere anything has ever happened, and everywhere anything has ever happened, right now. So that's no small thing to be a part of. And it's not something we can be apart from either. It's impossible. All we can do is affect our experience, and that's what thinking does. It doesn't create reality, it creates an experience. And we're each free to have our own in that regard. And yet, since we're each free to have our own, we're all simultaneously having the same freedom to have our own that we actually share. We're operating on the same platform, each one of us. It seems distinct based on the thinking we do and the stories we tell, but that is common also amongst humans. So there again is the similarity rather than the distinction. The thing that keeps us together is the thing we do wrong in the same way, but it's no different for any of us. All we do is attach different faces, different places, different times, and think of it as unique, when in fact, if everyone's doing it to that degree they're doing it, it is not unique. It's another shared example of the intimate nature of our seamless existence.
Yes, that's great. Yeah. That's a great thought. Yeah.
So what are you doing today?
Today, actually, I started to skate. My whole life, I always wanted to skate since I was in high school. But, I was so pessimistic. Even I started to realize, because I always wanted to skate, but my mind in high school was like, you shouldn't be skating. You're too you're not a kid anymore. But a few weeks ago, I just went and got me a skateboard. I started skating, so I'm gonna go outside, skate for a little bit. I know it sounds funny.
I live about 100 yards from the skate park in Venice, where skateboarding really took off in terms of a highly developed sport back in the 60s. So there's a lot of skateboarding going on down here. That's great though. So you used to escape and now you're skating.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Yes. I'm gonna go ahead and skate for a little bit. Yeah.
And Harry, you're a good man.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead. I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I'm gonna skate for a little bit and then go to work.
Okay. So something I'm gonna ask of you. During the week, and I'd like to do this again with you next week sometime.
Yes, of course.
To show the perspective and show people listening the potential of the discussion to change and evolve and develop and engage in this incredible capacity we have to talk about things. And if you write things down that occur to you during the week that seem to shift a little bit, just from talking about it, your own awareness, it could do a lot of good for people listening to start seeing how those little pinpoints of awareness sort of break open the laughter rather than the serious nature of taking ourselves so seriously that we think the self we're taking seriously is dying when other people aren't agreeing with us and other people aren't going along with us. And we want to feel separate from everybody else because our thinking about other people is so pitiful. That depressive nature, suicide's at an all-time high right now. It's not a coincidence. It's not an accident. Coincidence is actually coincidence, meaning everything is happening right now together, sequentially, instantaneously, immediately, everything right now. So it's not an accident when we set things off in unhealthy decisions that we think our life is threatened and need to kill ourselves when the self we're trying to kill doesn't even exist. It's an imagined thought about a thought thinking of itself has become our self, and we feel like there's so little value in it. Why? There's no value in it. We're actually feeling it correctly, and yet thinking of it as something we need to fill. And one thing that can't be filled is something that doesn't exist. You can't fill it. You can't fill it with enough. So I'd love to have you write about that in any way, and then we can talk about some of the points you're seeing. And I will also think about our conversation and talk about things that I want to plant some seeds. Nothing you need to think about or agree with or have faith in. But if you consider them, you'll start noticing some of them. I don't know all of them, because I think a lot of things that may be a little wonky at this point, and I'm trying to sort them out. But if you consider them, you'll start noticing stability immediately, because you'll be thinking about things accurately. And you'll start noticing that you have an absolute guidance system that knows when you're right, that absolutely knows when you're right, because you're not fighting for it. You're at peace. You feel that sense of calm. There's no ripples, there's no disturbances. You just know it. When I began to act on that basis, I started doing things that seemed absurd to other people. And when I heard their absurdity, I thought, thank you. Thank you for clarifying for me. I'm doing something that I couldn't have even imagined doing. Certainly, why would I expect you to imagine me doing it? And yet those things led to very productive results. Seemingly miraculous, but my sense is the real miracle is that we can act dumbed down and go numb and think that's normal and that's healthy and that's the only thing we can do, when in fact that the miracle is that we can be insane and think we're sane, when in fact reality is healing is natural, forgiveness is natural, the entirety of our species is healthy and capable of recovery in ways that we haven't even yet imagined, while we think of disease as just a foregone conclusion. And there's nothing we can do about it. We can absolutely think better about what we're thinking, think more accurately, think more honestly, and begin to actually align with reality and express it naturally, because it doesn't take any effort to do what already exists. We don't have to work it into being. There's no effort in it at all. It's just easy. And my experience is I would look back at something that happened and say, wow, I didn't even notice. It was so smooth and so natural. I didn't even notice while it was happening that there was anything different, because that sameness has always been the same in my experience, and same for you. That awareness has always been perfect. It's always been pure. It's always been complete. It's the thinking about it as though the thinking was distinct from it that has been impure and incomplete and disturbed. And that's all that it is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You're a good man. I appreciate very much that you followed up with me after 2 years.
No, I always wanted to thank you. I always wanted to thank you because you helped me a lot. I always remember you. Every call, speaking with you the first time, it was just, I'm always very thankful.
Well, and I am very thankful that you did what you did to do what you did to get to the place you are, to be here now, and to appreciate the value that we share. It isn't what I say, it's something we all have. So I just do my best to be as accurate as I can and as persistent as I can, so that I don't find sitting back and falling into ruts of my own imagination. I want to engage. I want to find the problems. I want to look at the problems. I want to see the shortfalls. I want to do the stupid things so I can say, oh, that was really stupid. That isn't me. That's just something stupid I was thinking. Yeah, I'm a lot more willing to admit it when I see it as something I'm doing than something I think I am. And thinking is something we do. It is a primary action that precedes every voluntary action we ever take. If the thinking is contaminated, the voluntary actions we take are going to be pollutants and contaminated and corrupt. And there's enough corruption on the planet caused by humans, not lions and tigers and bears, but humans, to evidence this line of thinking has been very popular for a long time and probably not diagnosed correctly for that time.
Yes.
That's my estimate.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Love you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
We'll talk in the meantime and plan to do this again next week. Thanks, Harry.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Thank you once again.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank you. I'll be in California the 22nd, 5 days. Yeah, I'm gonna go there with my daughter. My daughter's still in California, Southern California. She was here about 2 months ago, but
Mhm.
eventually they're gonna come here, move to Chicago.
Where are
So
they now?
where they're in Chino. I don't know where that is. Do you know where that
Yeah,
is?
yeah, sure. The hills.
Yeah, Chino Hills, Pomona. Yeah, San
Yeah,
Bernardino.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I had friends that went to Cal State or Claremont and the
Oh,
schools out
nice.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to live there for a little bit. Yes, that's
So
great.
when you come, if you have time, come visit. Love to see you, take you to lunch and talk a little further in person.
Of course, of course.
And I want to continue this with you too. You have great insight. You're perfectly intact. You're learning to talk about your actual experience in honest terms rather than promote the stories that have been unethical and immoral about why it's happening to you rather than being done by you. And I can see that transition happening. You've come a long way since we spoke. So you can see it has very little to do with what I'm talking about and everything to do with what you know to do correctly and to face honestly.
Mhm.
You've known it. So love you, brother.
Yes, I love you too as well, Jack. Thank you. Have a great day.
Peace.
Thank you. Peace. Thank you, Jack.